Max Law's life had always revolved around the mundane. Born and raised in the hilly terrains of San Francisco, he'd grown up amidst the muffled hustle of the city. Distant noises filtering through from the corners of the famous tram-ridden streets. The Lowell family comprised of Max, his aging parents, and a younger sister named Lucy, who was currently pursuing her PhD in anthropology at Stanford. Max himself was a budding film director, an artist painting stories on the wide canvas of the silver screen. Though he hadn't achieved commercial success yet, his documentaries had started to gain a steady fan base on various indie film platforms. Most of his stories spun around the darkness in human souls, but he'd never seen it up close. Recently, Max embarked on his most ambitious project yet. He wanted to capture the essence of urban isolation. New York City was his chosen backdrop. With its towering buildings and millions of stories, it was the perfect place to showcase how people can be surrounded by thousands and yet feel absolutely alone. Hunting for a location in NYC on a tight budget wasn't easy, but fortune favored him in the form of a gorgeous, somewhat aged townhouse he found listed on Airbnb. Located in the heart of Manhattan, the place promised old-world charm juxtaposed against the towering modernity of NYC. The pictures showcased wooden floors, high ceilings, and an allure of mysteries hidden within its walls. Upon his arrival, the house did not disappoint. Nestled between two modern buildings, the townhouse stood out like a relic from another time. Max's landlord, a man named Elijah, lived on the top floor. Max had found Elijah to be reclusive, his interaction minimal, often replying in monosyllables. Max's filming went smoothly. By day, he filmed the streets, capturing the solitude amidst the chaos. By night, he edited his material in the dimly lit living area of the townhouse. But one particular evening, as Max was engrossed in his work, a faint noise from below caught his attention. It was a soft, muffled thud, then a scrape, as if someone was moving something heavy. Intrigued, Max followed the sound, realizing that it came from below the floorboards, leading him to a locked door he hadn't noticed before. It was the entrance to the basement. The next morning, he approached Elijah. "Hey, is there a way to get into the basement? Heard some noises there last night." Elijah's face stiffened. "It's just an old house, Max. Your hearing is settled." However, Max's curiosity had been piqued. He was a filmmaker, after all, always in search of a mystery. That evening, once the house was draped in shadows, Max decided to pick the lock. The rusty latch gave way easier than he thought. What greeted him was an aging staircase, creaking under every step, leading into the darkness below. He felt a surge of paranoia, a looming dread, but pushed forward. As he descended, another soft thud reached his ears, followed by a muted whimper. The sight that met his eyes froze his blood. At the far end of the dank, dimly lit basement, he found a cage. Inside it was a gaunt, terrified woman, her eyes pleading for help. Chains bound her wrists, bruises decorated her pale skin, her clothes tattered. A horrified gasp escaped Max's lips. Before he could process the grim discovery, a cold hand clasped over his mouth from behind. Elijah's voice, now dark and sinister, whispered in his ear, "Curiosity can be a dangerous thing, Max." Panicking, Max elbowed Elijah, breaking free momentarily. The basement had become a maze of darkness, with its stacks of old furniture and shelves. Max remembered a rusty pipe he'd seen earlier. Grabbing it, he swung at Elijah, who was quickly advancing on him. The blow connected, and Elijah staggered back, giving Max just enough time to unlock the cage and help the terrified woman out. Together, they rushed up the stairs and out of the townhouse, Max's heart racing faster than ever before. Minutes felt like hours, but they finally reached the safety of a nearby police station. The woman was later identified as Clara, a tourist from Berlin who had disappeared without a trace months ago. The police stormed the townhouse, only to find it eerily empty. Elijah was gone. Max's stay in New York soon became a nightmare. Every corner he turned, every shadow he saw, he felt the ominous presence of Elijah lurking, watching. The paranoia was suffocating, the fear very real. With Clara's rescue and Elijah's disappearance, Max's story made headlines. Film offers poured in. Max's urban isolation documentary took a dark twist, turning into a terrifying tale of a man's descent into madness and the horrors of human captivity. As months passed, Max returned to San Francisco. He was hailed a hero, but the nightmares persisted. The fear of Elijah returning never left him. However, in a surprising twist of fate, Clara and Max grew close, finding solace in each other's company after the traumatic event. One day, as Max returned from a shoot, he found a letter at his doorstep. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message clear. Sometimes the best stories are those we don't chase. Take care, Max. The letter wasn't signed, but Max knew. It was Elijah's final taunt. Years rolled on, but the terror of that night in the New York townhouse remained etched in Max's memory. Elijah was never found, becoming a ghost of Max's past, but life had a way of mending broken souls. Clara and Max, having found love amidst the horror, got married. They leaned on each other, always vigilant but determined to lead a life filled with happiness. In the end, while the shadows of the past lurked close, the light of their present was strong enough to keep the darkness at bay. Claire Sinclair had a picturesque life, a loving husband named David, a delightful toddler named Lily, and a job as a junior architect. Despite the blessings, the stress of city life in Chicago was wearing her thin. She longed for a quiet, undisturbed weekend, a getaway from the hustle and bustle. "I found a place," David said one evening, holding up his tablet. "An old vintage home in the countryside. Perfect reviews. The host is a nice old lady, Ms. Evelyn. This might just be what you need, Claire." The vintage home's photo displayed an elegant two-storied structure nestled amidst towering trees. It seemed too good to be true. They booked it without a second thought. The drive to the countryside was smooth, the scenery shifting from skyscrapers to endless stretches of green. When they reached the listed address, the sun was beginning to sink, casting long, eerie shadows. The home was just as they had seen in the photos, only a tad bit creepier in the diminishing light. Claire's apprehension grew when they were greeted not by an old lady, but by a middle-aged man, his skin weathered and his eyes darting nervously. "Ah, you must be the Sinclairs," he rasped. "I'm John, Evelyn's son. Mom's been under the weather, so I'm handling things for now." Despite the slight unease, they followed John into the house. Claire noticed a distinct coldness inside, though she brushed it off as a result of the home's vintage nature. As John showed them around, Claire couldn't shake off the feeling that his eyes lingered on her for a bit too long. That night, as they settled into their bedroom, Claire whispered her concerns to David. "There's something off about John, I feel it." David laughed softly. "City life has made you a little paranoid. He's just a bit socially awkward, that's all." Claire wasn't convinced but chose to put her worries to rest for the sake of the trip. The next morning, they explored the surrounding woods. Lily was in her element, giggling and chasing butterflies. The day was going perfectly until Claire stumbled upon a discarded newspaper half buried in the dirt. The headline sent chills down her spine. "Local man escapes prison. Convicted murderer on the loose." Below the bold letters was a mugshot of John, looking just as menacing. Panic welled up in her. She remembered the photos of Evelyn on the Airbnb page, the sweet old woman she was expecting to meet. Instead, they were introduced to this imposter, a convict posing as her son. What had he done to Evelyn? Heart pounding, Claire rushed back to the house. As she approached, she overheard John speaking on the phone. "No, they don't suspect a thing. Yes, everything's going as planned." Claire's worst fears were materializing. She found David, pulled him aside, and showed him the newspaper clipping. His face drained of color. "We need to leave now," he whispered. But as they packed their bags in haste, they heard a sharp cry from the living room. "Lily?" Rushing downstairs, they found John holding a terrified Lily. His face contorted into a sinister grin. "Leaving so soon?" David's eyes darted between John and Lily, his voice trembling. "Please, she's just a child. If you need to hurt someone, hurt me. Let my family go." John stared at Lily for a long, tense moment. The innocence in her eyes seemed to penetrate his hardened exterior. With a heavy sigh, he pushed Lily towards them. "Go," he rasped, remorse evident in his eyes. "For the child." As they sped away from the house, David called the police. Within minutes, the house was swarming with officers. The aftermath was harrowing. They learned that Evelyn was found tied up in the basement, alive but traumatized. John had impersonated her, hacked into her Airbnb account, and continued to host unsuspecting guests. The chilling realization was that they weren't his first victims. The Sinclairs were grateful to be alive, but the trauma lingered. The dream of a peaceful family getaway turned into their worst nightmare. For weeks after, Claire would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, images of that day replaying in her mind. Every shadow, every unfamiliar sound made her jump. One evening, a letter arrived. It was written in shaky handwriting. Opening it, Claire's eyes widened. It was from Evelyn. The letter read, "I'm so deeply sorry for what you and your family endured. It was never my intention for anyone to be harmed in my home. I'm in therapy now, trying to process the trauma. John was my estranged son, battling his own demons. The police informed me that they believe he had acted alone. They've increased patrols in the area. Please know I'll do everything to ensure this horror never repeats. Thank you for your bravery, and I hope one day you find peace." The Sinclairs clung to each other, finding solace in the fact that they had survived, and in the hope that time would mend their shattered mirrors. Olivia Walker, a 35-year-old urban planner from London, had been tirelessly weaving together the urban fabric of cities, attending monotonous meetings, and refining city maps for over a decade. The exhaustion of city life had sunk deep into her bones. She longed for a break from the maddening rush of civilization and her marital issues. Her husband had recently left her, and her 2 kids were with her mother for the summer. Searching on Airbnb, she found the perfect escape, a rustic, renovated barn nestled in the remote village of Dunwich, Suffolk. The pictures displayed cozy interiors, old-world charm, and open fields as far as the eye could see. The host, Mrs. Eleanor Goodwin, a frail 70-year-old widow, had decided to let out her barn after her husband's demise 2 years ago. Eleanor's profile mentioned her love for her garden and how she had lived in Dunwich her entire life. It seemed ideal, and Olivia immediately booked it for a week. When Olivia arrived, the barn looked just as lovely as the photos. The old wooden beams, the scent of fresh hay, and the aged chandeliers added an old-world allure to it. Eleanor welcomed her warmly, her eyes twinkling like a youngster's, despite the wrinkles on her face. "Dear, you'll find peace here, but do stay indoors at night. The countryside can be eerie," Eleanor whispered the last bit, with a slight chuckle. However, Olivia's first night was anything but peaceful. As she lay in bed, she heard soft footsteps outside her room. The sound seemed to approach her door, hesitate, and then fade away. Startled, she went out to check but found nothing. Thinking she was tired and imagining things, Olivia brushed it off. The next morning, Olivia confronted Eleanor about it. Eleanor's face went pale, but she brushed it off as probably a critter in the barn. Yet, there was a hint of fear in her eyes. But the footsteps continued every night. Olivia would lie in bed, eyes wide open, waiting for the footsteps to start. They were soft but deliberate, echoing through the night, tormenting her peace. By the 4th night, the terror was evident in Olivia's eyes. Desperate for answers, she decided to stay up and catch the intruder red-handed. However, around 3 a.m., she felt a chill running down her spine. The footsteps were louder, getting closer and closer and closer until they were just outside her door. The doorknob jiggled, causing Olivia to jump from her seat. She braced herself, weapon in hand, a sharp pair of scissors. But the door never opened. Instead, the steps slowly receded, leaving a deathly silence behind. The next morning, Olivia decided to confront Eleanor. There was something she wasn't being told. Eleanor sighed deeply, hesitating for a moment. "Decades ago, my husband had a run-in with a man named Gavin. Gavin was infatuated with me, but I chose my husband over him. Bitter and vengeful, he stalked us for years, sending threatening letters and sometimes even breaking in at night. We thought he had disappeared after we informed the police. But a year ago, just before my husband passed away, the nightly visits started again." Olivia was horrified. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor hesitated. "I thought he was after me and my husband. I didn't think he'd trouble the guests. I'm so sorry." That evening, they decided to call the police, but the village was small, and the nearest police station was miles away. They were told an officer would visit them the next morning. The fear in the barn was palpable. Both women were terrified. Olivia contemplated leaving, but something within her refused to be chased away in fear. She decided to set up her phone to record any movement outside her room that night. At around 2:45 a.m., the footsteps started. Olivia, scared yet determined, waited. The footsteps approached, and the door jiggled. Then, after what felt like an eternity, they retreated. Morning came, and Olivia quickly grabbed her phone to check the footage. The video showed a man trying to open her door and then slowly backing away. It was the proof they needed. The police recognized the man as Gavin. They raided his home and found pictures of Eleanor and Olivia, along with various tools that suggested he intended harm. Gavin was arrested, and the barn's eerie nights came to a halt. The weight of the terror slowly lifted, and Olivia's last days at the barn were filled with the peace she had originally sought. Eleanor, grateful to Olivia for bringing an end to her nightmare, refused to charge her for her stay. Both women, different in age and experiences, had faced terror together, forming an unexpected bond. When Olivia returned to London, she carried back not just memories of fear, but also of resilience, strength, and a surprising friendship. Dunwich, with its green fields, beautiful sunsets, and an old renovated barn, had given her more stories than she had ever expected.